Story time of how I dated an adrenaline junkie who almost got me killed. I met a guy named Zane on campus who was in my writing class. We started flirting and eventually exchanged numbers. I followed him on social media and I could tell that he was a very adventurous person. He had photos surfing, skydiving, riding ATVs on the beach, rock climbing, and just living his best life. This got me even more interested and I hit him up asking him to take me on his next adventure. That's when he told me he was going base jumping the following week and I was more than welcome to join him, to which I agreed. He took me to an amazing mountainside and I watched him and his friends base jump. He asked me if I wanted to try and I told him it was a little too extreme for me. He told me there was a place nearby for beginners to jump into the water and I nervously agreed to go. We went to this tall ledge overlooking the lake, but it was still way too high up to jump from. I told him I was too scared to jump, but he talked me into it by saying he's been jumping from this ledge for years with people and that I'd be fine. While I was standing on the edge looking down and contemplating it, he pushed me. When I came up to the surface, my heart was pounding out of my chest and I was furious. Then I saw that he jumped as well and we were both fine. The anger quickly subsided, but I made him promise to never do something like that again. I should have known better because his next stunt almost got me killed. Part 2 of how I dated an adrenaline junkie who almost got me killed. Zane texted me a few days later and asked if I was ready to go on another adventure with him. I agreed and asked him what he had in mind. He told me it was a surprise and to bring a bathing suit. Zane picked me up with his thrill-seeking friends and we headed out. I quickly figured out that we were going whitewater rafting, which sounded really fun. When we arrived, some other rafters warned us that the water was really rough that day and advised us against going out. I was really nervous and to make things worse, no one brought a life jacket. I almost wanted to back out, but I didn't want to be the only one to chicken out in front of Zane. The water was rough and the current was moving fast, but everything was going okay. However, a few miles down the river, the waves got worse and there were huge rocks everywhere. It felt like we almost lost control a few times and I asked Zane if we could stop, but he insisted that we had to keep going. Shortly after this, my worst nightmare came true when the raft flipped. I kept getting pulled underwater and at one point my head hit a rock which almost made me pass out. For a second, I thought it was the end for me. By some miracle, I was able to get to shore with the rest of the group. To my surprise, Zane was laughing about how crazy it was and how we should go again. I was terrified after this experience and I decided to stop seeing him after this. Story time about how I found out my boyfriend was cheating on me with men. A few years back, I was dating a guy who was 10 years older than me. I was in college and he was working as a paramedic in a big city and a volunteer firefighter for his hometown. He had been open and honest about his past with me about fooling around with a few guys. I was accepting of it and never thought much of it because we had what I thought an honest relationship. About a year into our relationship, I was at his house one day hanging out with him when he had gotten a phone call about an event for his fire department that he'd forgotten about. He quickly put on his formal uniform, kissed me goodbye, and rushed out of the door. He said it would only be around an hour or so, so I decided to stay at his house and wait for him. It was normal for him to leave randomly to respond to fire calls for his local fire department. I started doing my school paper on my iPad and decided to switch over to his laptop to do the rest because it was easier. I didn't plan on snooping, but he had left his Facebook open and I kept hearing a notification that someone was messaging him. I went to close out the Facebook and realized it was someone I had never heard of before. I saw an alarming message about a BJ from this guy. At this point, I couldn't help myself and I needed to know more, so I started reading the chat between them. It only got worse from here. Part 2 of how I found out my boyfriend was cheating on me with men. When I opened the messages on Facebook between my boyfriend and this guy, my heart dropped. It turns out that he met up with this guy while I was in class or at work and took him to his firehouse. They ended up hooking up and going all the way. As I read further back, I realized that he met this guy on a fire call at work. He worked in an area where there were several gay bars. When he was responding to a call, he took this guy's drunk friend to the hospital and this guy tagged along. They exchanged numbers and decided to meet up. I had recalled my boyfriend telling me about going on a call to a gay bar recently and being hit on, but that's all he said. However, it gets worse. He told this guy that I was a cover-up for his very conservative Catholic family. Panic set in when I read this and I went downstairs to get a bottle of water. His mom was in the kitchen and without knowing what I just saw, she sat me down to tell me that her son was a pathological liar and I shouldn't trust him. I eventually went back upstairs to wait for him and left the Facebook messages open. When he arrived and realized that I knew, he immediately panicked and started apologizing. He swore up and down that he was straight and for some reason I didn't have the heart to end the relationship with him right then. I later found him in a group chat for gay men talking about sex and eventually ended the relationship because I couldn't trust him. He started dating another woman a few months after. This is how I found out my childhood best friend was a ghost. I grew up with a girl named Katie Wells. I lived on a farm and Katie lived with an old woman named Irene in the next house over. Katie and Irene weren't related, but whenever I asked Katie about her, she would just change the subject. It seemed like they never got along because they never talked to each other. Katie seemed really sheltered and I thought it was because Irene wouldn't let her do much. Whenever I would talk about boys or a new celebrity crush I had or even a new popular TV show, she never knew what I was referring to. A while later, my mom ended up quitting her job and working from home, so she didn't take me to Katie's house to have Irene watch me anymore. I remember wanting to go over to see Katie, and I asked my mom a few times, but she always said no. I eventually made new friends, and me and Katie grew apart. A couple years went by, and I started to realize I never saw Katie around anymore. She used to talk about her dad, Pat, a lot, so I assumed she went to live with him. I saw Irene outside one day, and I asked her how Katie was doing and where she'd been. However, she just looked at me like I was crazy. She told me that she had no idea who Katie was and that no one has ever lived with her. I told Irene about how we used to play together at her house, and she gave me a weird look and asked me if I was feeling okay. This is when things got strange. Part 2 of how I found out my childhood best friend was a ghost. The more details I told Irene about Katie, the more she looked at me like I was mental. She assured me it was just me and her in the house when my mom would drop me off. I was shocked. I went home and asked my mom about Katie, and she gave me the same confused look Irene just gave me and told me she didn't know what I was talking about. I couldn't believe it. How was I the only one who remembered her? I was starting to think I was going insane. It even crossed my mind that maybe Katie was an imaginary friend that I made up when I was little. However, I vividly remember playing with her every time I went over. I thought about it for days and I couldn't get it out of my head. The mystery kept me up at night and I even dreamt about my old childhood friend. I decided to do some research on Irene's house and my heart sank to my stomach when I realized what happened. I discovered the first person to ever own the house was a man named Patrick Wells back in 1941. I tried to find anything I could on Katie, but nothing came up. I remember Katie talking about her dad Pat when I was younger. It finally made sense how she never knew about any recent events I would bring up and why her and Irene would never communicate. I realized that I was the only one who saw Katie because she wasn't alive. I had been playing with a spirit all that time growing up. Story time about how a guy I hooked up with posted me on an explicit website. In the summer of 2018, I was a senior in high school and worked at a bike rental shop. I was always kind to the customers but also careful not to be too friendly. One day, it was a few minutes before closing when this group of college guys came into the shop to rent out some bikes for the week. I gladly helped them with the rental and got all the bikes ready. As I was sizing them up and chatting, all the guys were being really friendly and telling me about all their fun plans. I finished getting their bikes ready and before they left, they asked me for my Snapchat. I never gave out my personal information to customers, but I let it slide because these guys were so fine. I started talking to them on Snap over the next few days and one of them caught my eye. His name was Tom and we just clicked. He was easy to talk to and he would even come by the shop to say hi every now and then. We were flirting with each other a lot and he finally asked me to hang out with him. During our first hangout, he invited me back to the rental house where all of them were staying for the week. I spent the night and we hooked up. The next morning I left and throughout the week we kept messaging each other like normal. Things seemed to be going great until I woke up one morning and saw a heart-dropping text from Tom. Part 2 of how a guy I hooked up with posted me on an explicit website. When I woke up in the morning, I saw a text from Tom. When I read it, my heart dropped and I felt like I was going to pass out. In his text, he said, "Thanks for the content," followed by a link to an explicit website. When we hooked up, he asked if he could record it. I was into that kind of thing, so I agreed but made sure to tell him I didn't want anyone else to see it. When I clicked the link, I saw that he had posted the video on this website and it was already racking up views. I was mortified. I tried to text him and the other guys, but they had already blocked me. To make matters worse, the following week, everyone at my high school found out about the video. I don't know how they got a hold of it, but I'm guessing someone came across it and recognized me. The whole school was sharing it and talking about it, and I was so embarrassed. Then I was called into the principal's office along with the guidance counselor and my parents. I ended up getting my phone taken away for a month, followed by my boss giving me a lecture about why we don't give out personal information to our customers. We contacted the police, but we never heard back from them and it ended up being a dead end. Even though my parents were furious, they were still understanding. Thankfully, we were able to get the video taken down. I never heard from Tom or those guys again. Storytime about a catfish that went way too far. My coworker Ron was always looking for girls way above his league on dating apps and social media. If the girl didn't look like a supermodel, he wasn't interested. He would always complain that the girls he liked would never respond. To make matters worse, Ron isn't the best looking guy in the world and he'd been out of the dating scene for a few years. We told him to lower his standards and be more realistic, but he wouldn't budge. One of my other coworkers named Jason decided to give him what he wanted and made a fake Facebook profile pretending to be a beautiful girl named Bella. He sent her location to Canada and messaged Ron. Ron took the bait and they began messaging back and forth for months. He would always talk about Bella and how he couldn't wait to go to Canada to meet her. He was looking at plane tickets and talking about how he's been saving up for this trip. I was starting to think that this joke was going too far, but I hadn't seen anything yet. Ron came to work one day distraught and said that Bella had gotten into a terrible car accident and is in a coma that she wasn't expected to come out of. He said Bella's sister messaged him last night and told him the news. I figured Jason must have gotten bored of catfishing Ron and this was his way of killing Bella off and being done with it. Little did I know that Jason had no intention of stopping anytime soon and this was just the beginning. Part 2 about a catfish that went way too far. Ron was sad for weeks about the news of Bella being in a coma, but said that Bella's sister had been cheering him up. One day, Ron came in and told me that he's developed feelings for Bella's sister and they've been talking every day since the accident. I couldn't believe that Jason was still catfishing this man, now as a whole new character. Ron was happy again and falling for Bella's sister and was now talking about going to Canada to visit her instead. About a month later, Ron came into work frazzled. He explained to me that Bella had miraculously come out of her coma, which was great, but he had since moved forward with her sister. He said that Bella found out they had been talking every day while she was in a coma. He further explained that the sisters are now fighting over him and he doesn't know what to do. Just then, Ron looked at his phone and turned his pill as a ghost. Bella's sister made a public post on Facebook with Ron tagged that read, "You think your boyfriend is so good? Look what he sent me when you were in a coma," with private photos of Ron attached. This whole thing had already gone too far, but this was just taking it to another level. I finally spilled the beans and told him that it was Jason from electronics the whole time. Ron ran over there enraged and confronted Jason. They ended up fighting in the parking lot that same day, but somehow they're still friends and laugh about it now. My husband and I are in our late 20s and have been married for 4 years. He finished college with a finance degree and thought he'd go into accounting, but quickly found out that it wasn't his passion. He found some jobs and ideas pre-COVID, but nothing really stuck. Since COVID, he hasn't attempted anything and said that after the pandemic ends, there will be a boom of jobs and he can find what he's passionate about. I've been working full-time and thankfully my job became remote. I've been paying the keeping the food on the table. After the fiscal year closed, my work had done really well. We sell medical testing equipment, which was a big product of 2020. I was given a promotion and a pay raise, but also a small bonus. It was exciting because I could finally repair my purse and replace some shoes that were destroyed. When I told my husband, he seemed way more excited than me over this promotion. He went off about how he was going to redo his game area and get new systems. I was dumbfounded and got quiet because I couldn't believe what he was saying. He eventually went out and spent all of my bonus on a new computer. We got into a huge argument and he called me selfish for not being happy that he got to achieve his dream. He called me spoiled for being upset that I couldn't spend money on myself first. I called him ungrateful since I was the only one providing. He got mad and left the house saying that I'm making the money so I shouldn't throw it in his face that he doesn't have an income. Everyone thinks I overreacted to something that makes my husband happy. I've gotten so many texts about being an a-hole that I'm starting to wonder, am I?